Hey y'all, it is really late. Oh my goodness, I'm so tired. Let's get right into the final portion of my podcast on Childhood Under Siege by Joel Bakken. Now, the last half to quarter of the book, Bakken focuses more on he shifts away from advertisements and how video games target children, and he shifts to something um which in my opinion is less relatable but more sinister, which is the medical professions, child psychiatry, pharmaceuticals. Um, One again, Bakken continues a thread of deregulation being bad by explaining the Bayh-Dole Act. Now, the Bayh-Dole Act was created by the Reagan administration in an attempt to kind of spur technological development in the states, because up until that point, all all scientific development and all discoveries were through government funded labs. And Reagan thought that by deregulating this and incentivizing selling these discoveries, we would, more knowledge would be found, and then that knowledge would trickle down while the, industrious that discovered it would make lots of profits. It's typical of the Reagan administration. Now, this, as you can imagine, created quite a few hiccups, especially with something like the DSM. Now, DSM is basically like the recipe handbook for all of psychology. It has pretty much everything you can imagine for disorders, for more recently children and adults, always adults. Covers, like depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, ADHD, ADD, split. And if you can think of it reasonably, it is most likely in the DSM. Now, this book came out in 2012, and at that point, we are on edition 4 of the DSM, and what Bakken writes about is, through several scientists' points of views, he talks about their concerns with the DSM, because recently, at the time of the book's release, many new developments in child psychology were being, kind of gestating and gesticulating. For instance, childhood schizophrenia had been recently discovered, and which was a big deal because schizophrenia was not really thought to manifest until adulthood. However, the discovery was that because the reason they didn't think that childhood schizophrenia existed was because children could not feel like what they quoted as mania or euphoria of schizophrenia, basically the highs of it. But Bakken said that they found, oh my goodness, Bakken said that they found that childhood schizophrenia, the euphoria stage of the disorder, was actually characterized by mania and high activity and low attention span, and the low of schizophrenia was depression, irritability, things like that. So naturally, drug companies jumped on this. They made quite a bit of medication to deal with this. And Bakken feared that in the 5th edition of the DSM, which was published in 2014, 2015, 2013, shortly after the book was published, that there would be so many childhood behavior would be commodified. And we saw something like this in the 90s with a rise of Ritalin prescriptions for childhood ADHD and childhood ADD. And this kind of treatment through medication represents a tonal shift from, kind of past approaches, as we are still in the dark ages of psychology. We are in the medieval ages, is what I read somewhere. and as much progress as we made from, thinking that we can cure people by cutting out parts of their brain in the 60s to now, we are still in the medieval ages. And Bakken feared that with, the backbone of the Bayh-Dole Act, people would commodify childhood behavior. Things like mild childhood depression, where if there's any sort of mild irregularity or abnormality with a child, a drug company could commodify it and put them on medication, regardless of the side effects, which was another thing Bakken discussed, uh, is that the side effects of um, like antidepressant medications, for example, like Prozac and things like that, are well known in the medical community, but are not known or were not known in the public body that was prescribed, giving these prescriptions to their children. And this actually resulted in quite a few suicides due to several side effects with antidepressant medication. And that's kind of what cracked the lid. Now, another tactic that Bakken discussed is how these major medication corporations will ghostwrite or pay doctors to find studies, or they will do studies where they set up the conditions to make their product look more favorable. For instance, if you're comparing medicine A to medicine B, you may the proper dosage of medicine A that you want to appear to look like the better product, and not enough dosage of medicine B or too much dosage of medicine B. For instance, they can skew this sort of scale to make results appear to be what they want. And then they will have doctors ghostwrite these. They will put a doctor's name on it, and journals and other publications will oftentimes mistakenly publish these as if they are independent research and not a corporation paid study. And I really thought that this section of the book was quite interesting because unlike I can't spend 15 minutes ranting about this like I did about loot boxes 2 weeks ago, but I am a neurotypical individual. I have not had any any sort of mental illness in my family. I have, other than like a trend towards addictive personality. But as I was reading this, I think of a good friend of mine who goes by the name of Xavier, and I love Xavier to death. I've known Xavier since third grade, and he is just a not a neurotypical individual. I'm not entirely sure what he has, but he is not mentally healthy. And he would always tell me that, oh, I don't like to take, my medication makes me feel loopy, or my medication doesn't make me feel like myself. And I had the, privileged is what you would call it, the privileged viewpoint of saying, well, it's Medicaid, you got to take it, or you're gonna be crazy. But as I was reading this, all I could think about was my good friend Xavier, and just how these, the lack of ethics in this industry is absolutely appalling, and how many, kids, because that's what we are. We were children, and still are technically, kids, young adults, have been fed to this pyre. Thank God Xavier has not, killed himself or anything like that. I don't know what I would do if he did, but I sit there and think how many, neurotypical people like me had their Xaviers who, kind of lost their battle with their inner demons, or even worse, were fighting a losing battle due to the medication that was supposed to help them. So just as I read this, I couldn't help but, just think of Xavier and think of, the long-term consequences as we go into the future of this commodification of mental illness, of how we're already facing a mental health crisis in our country without any single, symptom of childhood being labeled as a new mental disorder or a new, something that needs to be medicated and treated. So, in conclusion, I really enjoyed Childhood Under Siege. From just kind of the history and Bakun's just absolute just slander of deregulation and figures like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, to his very succinct and deja vu inducing explanation of things like reward systems in video games, to even this last section of the book focusing on mental health that really just tugged at my heartstrings and made me think of one of my friends that I've known for the longest portion of my life. um Overall, I thought this was going to be a very bare bones book, a very analytical book, but it was just kind of chock full of emotion, at least for me, just due to all of the young connections with my personal life that I could draw. So, for someone in my generation that grew up playing video games like I did, that had an iPad, that had a tablet, or had a computer, or someone in my generation that has, struggled with mental health, I absolutely recommend this book, because this book will just, if you're anything like me, will set off alarm after alarm after alarm and ring so many bells for your childhood. So overall, I really enjoyed Childhood Under Siege by Joel Bakan. I think it's a great book, and I recommend it to anybody that kind of wants to learn more about the despicable nature of companies in our country. Thank you.